The Grand Hall of the Galactic Confederation sparkled with light that bounced off the crystal walls. Beings from 100 worlds filled the space, their voices a mix of sounds no human had heard before Earth joined the stars. James Miller stood tall despite feeling small. His blue uniform marked him as Earth's diplomat, chosen to represent humanity after they built their first faster-than-light ship. He took a deep breath. The air smelled different here, cleaner, but with a hint of something alien. "Remember, Diplomat Miller, do not speak unless spoken to," whispered Tom, his assistant. "These beings have had space travel for thousands of years. We are the newcomers." James nodded, but kept his eyes forward. That was the problem with most of his team. They thought humans should bow their heads and be grateful. James believed differently. Humanity had something special to offer the stars. The room went quiet as a group of tall, silver-skinned beings entered. Their movements were perfect, like water flowing. Each step seemed planned to the smallest detail. "The Australian royal delegation," Tom whispered. "They're said to be the most advanced species in the Confederation. Their minds can connect across space. They don't make mistakes." At the center walked a female figure whose silver skin had a faint purple glow. Her head was crowned with crystal that caught every light. This was Princess Lyra, daughter of Emperor Turin, ruler of 50 star systems. The princess's eyes, large and deep purple, scanned the room and stopped on James. Her face showed nothing, but James felt a slight push against his mind, like a gentle finger testing a wall. The Confederation president, a gas being floating in a special suit, moved to the center of the room. "Today we welcome Earth to our family of worlds. Though young, humans have shown great promise." Princess Lyra stepped forward without being invited. The room tensed at this break in protocol. "I must question this decision," she said. Her voice was musical but cold. "I have studied human history. They are ruled by emotions, not logic. They fight wars over feelings. Their decisions change with their moods. How can such unstable beings join our careful balance?" Whispers filled the room. James felt his cheeks grow hot. He had been warned this might happen. Some species feared humans would bring chaos to their ordered galaxy. The president began a careful reply, but James saw something that made his heart jump. Behind the Australian delegation, a service droid moved strangely, its lights flashing red instead of blue. James had worked with similar robots on Earth's moon base. He recognized the signs of a security override. Without thinking, James pushed past 2 bug-like diplomats and ran toward the princess. Security guards turned toward him, weapons rising. "Stop, the droid," James shouted, pointing. As if triggered by his words, the droid's chest panel slid open, revealing a pulsing device inside. James reached Princess Lyra, grabbed her arm, and pulled her down just as the droid exploded. The blast was small but targeted, exactly where the princess had been standing. Force shields snapped into place. Guards swarmed the area. For a moment, all was confusion. When the smoke cleared, James found himself still holding the princess's arm. Her perfect face was inches from his, those purple eyes wide with something he couldn't read. "You touched me," she said, not angry, just stating a fact. "No non-Australian has ever touched royal skin." "I'm sorry," James said, standing and helping her up. "Where I'm from, stopping someone from getting killed is more important than protocol." For just a moment, James thought he saw something flicker across her face. Confusion, perhaps, or curiosity. The Emperor himself approached, his tall figure making James feel small again. "You saved my daughter using instinct?" the Emperor asked. "Yes, sir. Human instinct." The Emperor and Princess exchanged a look that seemed to contain an entire conversation. "Perhaps," the Emperor said finally, "there is something to learn from humans after all." Princess Lyra's face returned to its perfect calm, but her eyes never left James. "Perhaps," she said, "but I still have questions." 1 week after the explosion, James sat in the Earth Embassy, staring at his new orders. He read them for the third time, hoping they might somehow change. "You want me to be the what?" he asked his commander. Commander Ross sighed. "The official Earth liaison to the Australian Empire. It wasn't my choice, Miller. This came from the top." James ran a hand through his dark hair. "But the princess clearly hates humans. She tried to block us from joining the Confederation. And yet," Ross said, "Emperor Torren himself asked for you by name. After you saved his daughter's life, he seems to think you have potential." James looked out the window at the Confederation capital city. The tall crystal buildings caught the light of the twin suns. Somewhere in that city, Princess Lyra was probably hoping this assignment would fail. "When do I leave?" he asked. "Today. The Australian royal ship leaves orbit in 4 hours." The Australian vessel was like nothing James had ever seen. The walls seemed alive, changing color slightly as different beings walked past. The air was cool and smelled of something like mint. An Australian guard led James to a large room with a view of the stars. There, standing with her back to him, was Princess Lyra. Her silver skin reflected the starlight. "Princess," the guard announced, "the human diplomat has arrived." Lyra turned slowly. Her face showed nothing, but James felt that same gentle push against his mind. "Diplomat Miller," she said, "my father has ordered me to work with you to improve relations between our peoples. I will follow his command." James tried a smile. "You could sound more excited about it." "Excitement is an emotion," she said simply. "Australians moved beyond emotions 300 years ago. We found they clouded logical thinking." James raised his eyebrows. "You removed emotions, all of them. Through careful breeding and some genetic adjustment, we found no need for them. Then what guides your decisions? What makes you care about anything?" Lyra's head tilted slightly. "Logic, efficiency, the greater good. We do not need to care as you understand it." A soft chime sounded, and a holographic image appeared between them. A star map showing a small planet on the edge of Australian space. "Our first task," Lyra said. "Colony K-12 has reported unusual readings. We are to investigate." The colony was in chaos when they arrived. A strange sickness had broken out, affecting the mixed population of Australians and other Confederation species. The Australian doctors worked with cold efficiency, but the disease spread faster than they could track it. "It doesn't follow any logical pattern," one doctor told them. "We cannot predict who will get sick next." James watched the medical team work. Something bothered him about the way people moved in the colony. "What do you feel is wrong?" Lyra asked, noticing his expression. "Feel? I thought you didn't value feelings," James said. "I value useful data. Your species often perceives patterns through what you call gut feelings before you consciously understand them." James walked around the colony center, watching. Then it hit him. "It's not in the air," he said suddenly. "It's in the water. But not all water. Look at who's getting sick. Only people who drink from the West Side system." Lyra's eyes widened slightly, the most emotion he'd seen from her. "That makes no logical sense. The water systems are identical." "Yes, but human colonists often develop superstitions. The West Side fountain is decorated with flowers. People think it's lucky to drink there." Tests confirmed James was right. Someone had poisoned only that system. Later, back on the ship, Lyra studied James with those purple eyes. "Your solution was not logical. You had no data to support your theory initially." "Sometimes humans connect dots in ways that don't follow straight lines," James said. "We call it intuition. A primitive but occasionally effective method," Lyra admitted. For just a moment, James thought he saw something flicker in her eyes, perhaps curiosity. "Maybe there's room for both our approaches," he suggested. Lyra turned to look at the stars. "Perhaps, but I still have many questions about humans, Diplomat Miller." "Call me James," he said. She was quiet for a long moment. James, she finally said, as if testing how the name felt. We have much work ahead of us. Over the next month, James and Lyra worked together on diplomatic missions across 3 star systems. Though they still often disagreed, a rhythm developed between them. James brought creativity and intuition. Lyra provided structure and deep knowledge. It's strange, James said one day as they traveled on the royal ship. The colony sickness, the trade dispute on Varus 4, and now the missing supply ships. None of these problems seem connected, but they all affect both Australian and Earth interests. Lyra finished his thought. I have noticed this pattern as well. They sat in the ship's observation room. Space stretched out before them, endless stars against perfect black. James still found it beautiful, even after weeks of space travel. Lyra, he noticed, often looked at the stars too, though he couldn't tell if she found them beautiful or merely interesting. I think someone wants to drive Earth and the Australian Empire apart, James said. Create problems between us. Lyra's face remained calm, but her voice held a note of something new. Concern, perhaps. My analysis reaches the same conclusion. We should investigate further. How? We don't even know where to start. Perhaps, Lyra said slowly, we should not use official channels. If there is a plot, the plotters might have access to our communications. James smiled. Princess Lyra suggesting we break protocol. I must be having a good influence on you. She gave him a flat look. It is simply logical to adjust methods when standard approaches fail. 3 days later, they docked at Starpoint Station, a trading hub where species from across the galaxy met to exchange goods. The station was a massive ring spinning slowly in space, creating its own gravity. They wore simple clothes, no royal or diplomatic signs. Just 2 more travelers in the crowded halls of the station. My contact should be in the lower market, James said quietly as they walked past shops selling everything from rare foods to ship parts. Contact? You did not mention a contact, Lyra said. I've made some friends in the past month. People who move between worlds, hear things. Smugglers, Lyra translated. Information traders, James corrected with a smile. Not everything useful comes through official channels, Princess. The lower market was darker, smokier. Music played from hidden speakers, and the crowd pressed closer together. James noticed Lyra walk more stiffly. Australians avoided physical contact when possible. Over there, James nodded toward a small table in the corner. A blue-skinned woman with 4 arms waved at them. James, good to see you, the woman called. And you brought a friend. Very unusual friend, she added, looking at Lyra with clear recognition in her eyes. Mela, this is Lyra, James said. We need information. Mila leaned closer. About the troubles between Earth and the Australians. Many people asking about this lately. Dangerous questions. Who's asking? James pressed. Mila looked around nervously. Group called the Purists. They believe some species should not mix with others. They think Earth joining the Confederation was a mistake. Do they have access to ship systems? Communication networks? Lyra asked. Mela's eyes widened. They have friends in high places, that's all I know. Very high. She slid a small data disk across the table. This has locations, names. Be careful, James. These people. A loud explosion cut her off. The far wall of the market burst inward. People screamed and ran. They found you. Mela shouted over the noise. Go. Back exit. James grabbed the disc and Lyra's hand. They ran through the panicking crowd as armed figures in black entered through the broken wall. They reached the back hallway, but a second explosion blocked that exit too. Trapped, they turned to a small maintenance door. Emergency shuttle bay, James read from the sign. Inside, a single small shuttle waited. As they ran toward it, blaster fire hit the wall beside them. Get in, James shouted, pushing Lyra ahead as he returned fire with his hidden blaster. The shuttle's engines roared to life as more attackers entered the bay. James jumped inside, the door closing behind him as Lyra punched the launch controls. The small craft shot out of the station, taking damage as it went. Warning lights flashed across the control panel. Engines damage, Lyra reported calmly. Navigation system failing. We have limited control. James looked at the data on the screen. There's a planet nearby. We can make it, but it'll be rough. As they raced away from the station, Lyra turned to James. You were right. There is a conspiracy. Yeah, James said, gripping his seat as the shuttle shook violently. I just hope we live long enough to stop it. The shuttle fell through the planet's atmosphere like a burning stone. Warning alarms screamed as the craft shook violently. Hold on, James shouted, fighting with the controls. The ground rushed up to meet them, a vast purple forest under an orange sky. Lyra's fingers flew across the emergency systems panel, diverting remaining power to landing thrusters. The shuttle slowed just enough before crashing through the treetops. Branches snapped against the hull. With a final bone-jarring impact, they hit the ground and skidded to a stop. Silence fell, broken only by the hiss of damaged systems. Are you hurt? James asked, unbuckling himself. Lyra touched a cut on her forehead where silver blood trickled down. Minor damage only. James checked the shuttle systems. Most screens were dark. Communications are dead. Life support is failing. He frowned at one reading. And the atmosphere outside is toxic. High levels of chlorine gas. This is Verox 3, Lyra said. An uninhabited world. Australian survey teams charted it but deemed it unsuitable for colonization. James looked around the small shuttle. We're stuck here until someone finds us. The Australian fleet will search, Lyra said. But this system was not on our official route. Discovery could take weeks. James nodded grimly. Then we need to make this shuttle last. We have emergency rations, water recyclers, and very limited space. Lyra finished, looking around the shuttle cabin. It was barely larger than a small room, with 2 pilot seats, a tiny storage area, and a maintenance space in the back. 3 days passed slowly. They rationed food and power, keeping only essential systems running. The shuttle became their entire world, a world they had to share completely. For James, the close quarters were uncomfortable but manageable. For Lyra, whose species valued personal space and minimal contact, it was clearly more difficult. Your breathing pattern has changed, she noted on the 3rd night as they sat in the dim emergency lighting. Are you unwell? James smiled tiredly. Just thinking about home. Earth. The wide open spaces. You miss your world, she stated. Not a question. Don't you miss yours? Lyra was quiet for a moment. Australians do not miss places. It would be inefficient. You keep saying things like that, James said. But I've watched you these past weeks. You may not call them emotions, but you have reactions, preferences. Those are based on logical assessments, she insisted. James leaned forward. When you look at the stars, your eyes widen slightly. When we solved the colony crisis, the corner of your mouth turned up just a bit. Those aren't logical calculations. You are mistaken, she said, but her voice lacked its usual certainty. On the 5th day, the power systems failed completely. The temperature inside the shuttle began to drop as the heating died. We need to conserve body heat, James said, gathering the emergency blankets. On Earth, in survival situations, people share warmth. Lyra stiffened. Australians do not touch casually. This isn't casual. It's survival. Reluctantly, she moved closer to him. They sat side by side, blankets wrapped around them. James could feel her tension. Your heart rate has increased, she observed. Humans react to touch, he explained. It's comforting. Australians can sense others' minds when in close contact, she said quietly. It is why we avoid it. The sensation can be overwhelming. As the night grew colder, Lyra's silver skin began to dim. A bad sign, James knew. Australians needed warmth to maintain their energy. "You need to stay warm," he said, putting his arm around her shoulders. The moment they touched fully, Lyra gasped. Her eyes widened, glowing bright purple in the darkness. "What's happening?" James asked, concerned. "Mental contact," she whispered. "I can feel what you feel." A strange sensation washed over James, like a door opening in his mind. Suddenly, he felt a rush of new awareness. Curiosity, confusion, and something deeper that wasn't his. "Is that you?" he asked in wonder. Lyra's perfect composure cracked. Her face showed genuine shock. "This has never. Humans shouldn't be capable of." "Of what?" "The bond," she whispered. "I can feel your emotions. They're so strong." As they sat together in the darkness, something new formed between them. A bridge neither had expected. Across a gulf both had thought uncrossable. Morning came with a pale orange light filtering through the shuttle windows. James woke to find Lyra sitting across from him, watching him with those deep purple eyes. "You dream," she said simply. James rubbed his face. "All humans do." "Did you see my dreams?" "Fragments. Images. Emotions." She looked down at her hands. "The connection remains even though we are no longer touching." James felt it too, a gentle awareness of her presence in his mind, like knowing someone is in the next room without seeing them. "Is this normal for Australians?" he asked. "No. Mental bonds form between family members, but never with other species." She paused. It should not be possible. Over the next few days, as they worked to repair what systems they could, the bond between them grew stronger. Sometimes James would turn to ask Lyra a question, only to find she was already answering it. Other times, he would feel a flash of something not his own. Curiosity, confusion, and increasingly, other emotions Lyra claimed not to have. "I saw something when you were sleeping," Lyra said on the 8th night. "A memory, I think. Your childhood home." James nodded. "A small house by a lake on Earth." "It was beautiful," she said, the words sounding strange from her lips. "I felt what you felt when you remembered it." "What did I feel?" "Warmth. Safety. Something deeper I cannot name." "Love," James said. "That's what we call it." Lyra was quiet for a long time. "I saw other memories too. Moments from your training, your family. Humans feel so much, all the time. How do you bear it?" "We don't see it as a burden," James explained. "Emotions guide us. They connect us to each other." "They make you weak," Lyra said, but without conviction. "Do they?" "Your people removed emotions to become stronger, more logical. But I've seen your history through our bond, Lyra. I've seen flashes of what Australians were before." Her eyes widened. "You cannot have seen that. Those records are sealed. Not from our minds, it seems." James leaned forward. "You were artists once, explorers who traveled the stars out of wonder, not just logic. You created music that made people weep with joy." "That was before the Great War," Lyra whispered, "when emotions nearly destroyed us. So you cut them out, but you lost something precious too." Lyra stood and walked to the window, looking out at the alien forest. "I am experiencing things I should not be able to feel. It is because of our bond." "What are you feeling?" James asked gently. "Confusion. Curiosity. And when I think of returning to my world, to my old life." She turned to him, true fear showing on her face for the first time. "I feel sadness." "James, I should not feel sadness." James joined her at the window. Maybe the emotions were never truly gone, just buried deep. Lyra's hand moved slowly until her fingers touched his. The bond flared between them, stronger than before. "There is more we learned from the data disk," she said suddenly. "Things I had not told you." "What things?" The purists who attacked us, they have connections in the Australian royal court, high in the government. Possibly even your father? James asked, feeling her distress through their bond. No, but his chief advisor, Doran. He has always spoken against other species, against change. She met James's eyes. If he discovers what has happened to me, what I am beginning to feel, what would he do? Emotional contamination is considered a disease among my people. Those who show signs are. She couldn't finish. James felt her fear. And beneath it, something else, a warm current flowing between them that neither could name yet. We need to get off this planet, he said, not just to stop the conspiracy now, to show your people what they've lost. Lyra's eyes locked with his. The royal transport will find us eventually. But when they do, we must hide this bond. If they discover it, they'll separate us, James finished. Yes, she said. And I find that possibility. She struggled with the unfamiliar emotion. Frightening, James suggested. Yes, Lyra admitted. It frightens me. On the 12th day, rescue came. The sleek Australian royal ship appeared in the orange sky, its silver hull gleaming in the sunlight. Remember, James said as they gathered their few salvaged items, we can't let them know about our bond. Lyra nodded. Her face had returned to its perfect, emotionless mask, but James could feel her inner struggle through their connection. I will shield my thoughts, she said. Australians can do this with practice. And I'll try to think about boring Earth things, James said with a small smile. The rescue team wore full environmental suits against the toxic atmosphere. They moved with perfect Australian efficiency, asking few questions about the crash. Within hours, James and Lyra were back on the royal ship, heading toward the Australian homeworld. Emperor Toran himself greeted them upon arrival. The throne room was vast, built of the same crystal material as the Confederation Hall. The Emperor sat on a floating chair, his silver skin darker than Lyra's, marked with lines of age. Father, Lyra bowed. We have troubling news. The attack on your shuttle, the Emperor said. We know of this already. James stepped forward. Your Majesty, it's more than that. We have evidence of a conspiracy against both our worlds. The Emperor's eyes narrowed. Show me. James handed over the data disk from the station. As the Emperor reviewed it, James felt a cold presence enter the room. He turned to see a tall Australian male with eyes so dark they seemed black. Advisor Doran, Lyra said, her voice steady despite the flash of fear James felt through their bond. Princess, Doran bowed. We are relieved at your safe return. His eyes moved to James, studying him with cold interest. The Emperor looked up from the data. These accusations are serious. A group called the Purists, working within our government to sabotage relations with Earth. Absurd, Doran said smoothly. The Purists are a small fringe group with no real power. The evidence suggests otherwise, James countered. Doran's mouth tightened. Evidence gathered by a human. We cannot trust their emotional biased perspectives. I helped gather this evidence, Lyra said. It is sound. Doran studied her closely. Princess, you have spent much time with this human. Perhaps too much time. James felt Lyra's mental shield strengthen, but something must have shown in her face because Doran's eyes suddenly widened. Emperor, he said sharply, your daughter has been compromised. What do you mean? The Emperor demanded. Doran pointed at Lyra. Look at her eyes. The micro-expressions. She's showing emotional responses, human emotional responses. The room went silent. James felt Lyra's rising panic through their bond. Is this true? The Emperor asked quietly. Before Lyra could answer, Doran stepped forward and placed his hand on her forehead. Lyra gasped as he forced a mental connection. No, James moved to stop him, but guards held him back. She has been mentally bonded to the human, Doran announced, pulling his hand away in disgust. A deep connection. She is experiencing emotions. She is contaminated. The Emperor's face showed the first emotion James had seen from him. Shock. Is this possible? It must be purged, Doran said firmly. The human has infected her mind. We must break this bond and cleanse her. Father, please, Lyra spoke, her voice shaking slightly. What's happening to me isn't contamination. It's awakening. Listen to yourself, Doran hissed. Emotional language, imprecise, weak. He turned to the Emperor. This is what humans bring. Chaos, emotion, weakness. This is why the purists are right. James suddenly understood. You're not just connected to the purists. You lead them. Doran smiled coldly. The purists seek to keep our species pure, yes. I have supported their work. Humans are a disease spreading through the galaxy. We only want peace, James argued. Peace. Doran laughed. You bring chaos wherever you go. Your emotions make you unpredictable, dangerous. The Emperor raised his hand for silence. My daughter will undergo purification immediately. Father, no, Lyra pleaded, emotion now clear in her voice. James felt her pain through their bond. He had to do something. Emperor Doran, he said firmly, before you decide, there's something you need to know about your own history. The throne room fell silent. All eyes turned to James. Your history? The Emperor asked. You presume to teach me about my own people. Not teach, James said carefully. Remind. He stepped forward despite the guards tensing around him. Through our bond, I saw glimpses of your past, the Australian Golden Age. Before we removed the weakness of emotion, Doran said dismissively. Before you removed your greatest strength, James countered. He turned to address the Emperor directly. Your Majesty, did you know that Australian art was once sought across the galaxy? That your music could bring other species to tears? That your poetry was translated into 1,000 languages? The Emperor's face remained impassive, but James noticed his eyes flicker with interest. Ancient history, Doran said, before we became truly advanced. James continued, look at your greatest achievements. The star bridges, the healing crystals, the gravity sculptures, all created before the emotional purge. Since then, technical improvements, yes, but nothing truly new. Whispers rippled through the court. James felt Lyra's mind touching his, giving him strength. This bond between us, James said, taking Lyra's hand, ignoring the gasps from the watching Australians. It's not contamination. It's completion. The Emperor rose from his floating chair. Release my daughter's hand, human. Father, Lyra said, her voice steady but filled with new emotion. I choose to stand with him. You are not yourself, the Emperor insisted. The purification will make me empty again, Lyra finished. I have lived my whole life half alive. Father, through James, I have felt what we lost. Joy, wonder, hope. She stood taller. Even love. The word hung in the air like a challenge. Some of the younger Australians in the court leaned forward, curiosity clear on their usually blank faces. This is the human infection spreading, Doran shouted. Guards, separate them. No, the voice came from the back of the hall. A young Australian male stepped forward. I want to hear more. Others joined him, mostly younger Australians, moving to stand near James and Lyra. This is insurrection, Doran hissed. This is curiosity, the young Australian countered. Something you taught us to suppress. But many of us have questions. Why are our greatest works in our past? Why do other species connect in ways we cannot? What did we sacrifice for perfect logic? The Emperor looked at the divided court, young Australians on one side, the older guard with Doran on the other. Princess, he said to Lyra, you truly feel these emotions now. Yes, Father. And they do not make me weaker. They make me see more clearly. She stepped forward. It was Doran who ordered the attack of the Confederation. He wanted to blame humans, to keep Earth isolated. Our bond revealed his treachery. Lies, Doran shouted, but his perfect composure had cracked. Test us, James suggested. Let the royal mind readers examine our memories. The Emperor considered, then nodded. Two elder Australians approached, placing their hands on James and Lyra's foreheads. The room waited in tense silence. Finally, they stepped back. They speak truth, one announced. Advisor Doran has betrayed us. And there is more. The elder looked confused. Their bond has created something new, something powerful. Balanced mind, the other elder said with wonder. Logic and emotion in harmony. Guards moved to surround Doran, who glared at James with pure hatred. You've ruined everything. No, James said. I think we've just begun. The Emperor returned to his throne, studying his daughter with new eyes. This bond, can others achieve it? I believe so, Lyra said, with time, with openness. A new chapter for our people, the Emperor mused. Perhaps it is time. Days later, James stood with Lyra on a balcony overlooking the capital city. Below them, humans and Australians walked together, the first cultural exchange in centuries. Your people are changing, James said. It won't be easy. Neither will convincing humans to trust us, Lyra replied, her hand finding his. But we have made a start. Through their bond, James felt her emotions, still new to her, still sometimes overwhelming, but growing clearer each day. Hope, determination, and that deeper current, stronger than ever. What happens now? He asked. Lyra smiled, a real smile that lit her eyes with purple fire. Now we build something new, together.